Hey guys, the new rules about real estate commissions are approaching very quickly, August 17th. What does that mean for you? You read a lot of headlines. Most of the headlines are just like any headlines, garbage. Here's my take on what you should expect. There's two big changes. The first change is that the buyer's agent commission, so there's two commissions in a real estate deal, typically. The commission that's paid for the seller's agent and the commission that's paid for the buyer's agent. And when a property is listed, in the old way we used to do it, on the MLS and even on Zillow, over the last couple years, Zillow started advertising, hey, this property is offering this amount of compensation to the agent that brings a buyer. So everybody knew. Agents knew, if I sell this property, I make this amount of money. Buyers, once Zillow came along, started advertising this, knew what their agent was going to get paid. The Department of Justice doesn't want that to be that way anymore. And I think for people, they can say, well, it's not very transparent, right? And I think that's a valid point, but you understand what they're trying to do. They're trying to get the buyer and the buyer's agent to negotiate their fee in advance. They don't like that the seller's deciding the fee. They want the buyer and their agent to decide to negotiate the fee in advance. And I do think that will bring commissions down, because especially for agents that are just kind of phoning it in and aren't really able to articulate the value that they're providing to a buyer, are gonna be sheepish, and aren't gonna they're probably gonna compete on price and say, hey, I'm the cheapest, you should work with me, rather than I provide the most value and here's my fee and here's why we charge what we charge. So the big change for consumers is that when you call an agent and say, hey, I want to go see this property, the agent's going to say, cool, but we got to do some paperwork first. The new rules literally are not allowing us to show property unless we have a written agreement with a buyer that says how much that buyer is going to allow us to get paid if we sell a property to them. And so this is really the heart and soul of the Department of Justice's intent here, is to not have the seller decide that, it's to have the buyer and the buyer's agent decide it in advance. So I still think almost every case the seller is still going to pay the commission, because at the end of the day, buyers are coming up with a lot of money. They have their loan closing costs, they have their down payment, and if you're adding a commission on top of that, it's just going to be particularly painful. On the reverse, the seller is getting a windfall of money in many cases, and that's, it's going to make more sense for the seller to pay it. And if the seller's like, no, I don't want to pay it, I don't have to pay it, you go pay your agent buyer, you better believe that buyer is going to be like, okay, I have to pay my agent. Great, if they can. I want a discount on the house. We had a deal like that a couple months ago. We found a deal off market. Our buyer was a cash buyer. They're like, this is a great house. We think it's priced really well. We want the seller to feel really comfortable selling this property to us off the market, so we're gonna pay you. They paid me out of their pocket, wrote a check, but you better believe they were very particular about whether or not they were negotiating that cost out of the deal. So even though the seller felt great about not paying a dime in real estate commissions because I handled the transaction, the buyers were like, we better be getting a discount on this house. And of course they were, so it worked out. So there's no free lunch. It's not like, sellers, if you are like, no way, not paying a buyer's agent commission, forget you. The buyer is gonna obviously negotiate that out of the deal. At the end of the day, if you want commissions to go away, and I heard somebody say on the All In podcast, they were like, you'll know the monopoly is broken when the buyer's agent commission goes away. Okay, assuming there is a monopoly, if the buyer's agent commission is going to go away, you have to expect the public to stop using buyer representation. And I can tell you right now, buyers, the average buyer out there is going to really struggle to get a home under contract, especially in our area. Just do all the things that it takes to properly buy a house, which is get it under contract at a good price, understand the value of the property, do all the due diligence, in order to understand if this is the right property, if there's any problems with it. Buyers they don't know how to do that. Some of them are savvy enough to get most of the way there, but it's still a process that's extremely complex. And if you think about in a court situation, I mean, at the end of the day, realtors have a very limited capacity to practice law. It's actually the Colorado Bar Association sued the Board of Realtors and said, your realtors are practicing law day in and day out. And they ended up saying, well, yeah, they are, but it's kind of been working for the public and they can only do it in this limited capacity and we're going to let them do it. My point is that in a courtroom, are you going to represent yourself? In a fairly complex, probably the most complex transaction most people will ever do, are you going to represent yourself? Or what most people do, if they're not going to use an agent, they have the seller's agent do all the paperwork for them. When you're in a legal situation, are you going to use the same representation as, the person on the other side of the table from you? I think most people aren't. So my point is that if you want commissions to go away, you got to expect the public to do transactions on their own. Because if somebody's going to help them, there's got to be a fee there. So what I've also really noticed, I think, a lot of people are like, well, it needs to be this, Silicon Valley needs to come in and do like a one-click purchase, inspect, there's got to be some sort of technology. And what I've noticed, because I used to do discount real estate at the beginning of my career, where we basically would say, hey, we're the cheapest, and if you use us, you'll save a bunch of money. Guess what? Some people liked the idea of that, but the majority of people would look at me and be like, what's wrong with your service? Why are you doing transactions at such a discount? There must be, essentially, people perceive that if they're paying a lot less for something, it must be an inferior product. And on the purchase or sale of a house, that is not generally what folks are interested in. Anyway, long rant, but at the end of the day, understand that you're not going to know what your agent is going to make, what they're going to be paid by the seller. Agents are going to ask you to do paperwork in advance of seeing a house, so you really need to interview agents in advance. Like, don't just go to open houses and call random agents. And I know a lot of people see a listing on Zillow and they just kind of press the button and go take a look at it. I think now more than ever, especially because it's going to be an agent you don't know and they're going to ask you to sign an agreement in order to go look at that house, shop in advance, interview agents in advance, ask them what their due diligence process is, their negotiating strategy, how much experience, what are the types of homes they typically sell. Ask those questions, see if you click with them, and do it that way rather than just kind of being at the mercy of whatever agent shows up on Zillow, especially now that you got to sign paperwork in advance.